The last words she ever said to me still echo in my head. "You'll never see me again." I still remember that morning as clearly as if it happened yesterday. The air inside our house felt heavier than usual, like it knew what was coming before I did. Sunlight poured through the kitchen window, catching the steam from her coffee as she sat across from me, her eyes distant, her silence louder than any argument we'd ever had. We'd been married for 7 years, but that morning, it felt like I was sitting across from a stranger. Every word I tried to speak seemed to fall flat between us, as though the space we once filled with laughter had become a graveyard of things left unsaid. I remember reaching for her hand, and she pulled it away before I even got close. That was when I realized something in her had already left long before she stood up to walk away. The fight that followed wasn't loud. It was cold, restrained, and final. We didn't scream at each other. We simply tore each other apart with the quiet precision of two people who knew exactly where to strike. She said I didn't listen, that I made her feel invisible, that somewhere along the way, I had stopped seeing her. I wanted to tell her that she was wrong, that I loved her more than anything, but the words wouldn't come out right. My pride built a wall I couldn't break fast enough, and hers kept growing higher until I couldn't see her anymore. When she stood up and grabbed her coat, I thought it was another one of those temporary storms, the kind you survive after a day or two of silence. But when she turned around and looked me straight in the eye, something inside me froze. "You'll never see me again," she said, her voice shaking, her eyes glistening with tears she refused to let fall. It wasn't a threat or a plea. It was a promise. The sound of the door closing behind her was sharper than any slap. For a few seconds, I just stood there, staring at the space where she had been, half expecting her to come back, to tell me she didn't mean it, that it was all just anger and exhaustion talking. But the silence that followed was absolute. No footsteps, no car engine, no goodbye note. Just the ticking of the kitchen clock, marking the beginning of a life I didn't know how to live anymore. The house suddenly felt too big, too quiet, too clean. Her coffee cup sat untouched, the lipstick stain on its rim the only proof that she had been real. Her perfume still lingered in the air. That soft vanilla scent that used to comfort me now felt like a cruel reminder. I walked from room to room like a man searching for something he'd dropped but couldn't name. Every corner held a memory. Every photo frame whispered a story. And every silence echoed her words again and again. "You'll never see me again." I tried to call her, but her phone was off. I drove to her sister's place, but no one answered. It was as if she had vanished into thin air, taking every ounce of color in my world with her. Days passed, and I kept expecting her to walk through the door, maybe angry, maybe calm, but alive in my life again. Instead, the house began to feel like a museum of our marriage. Everything in its place, untouched, preserved in the exact position she left it. Her coat still hung by the door, her hairbrush still sat on the dresser, and her favorite novel was still open to the last page she'd read. I couldn't bring myself to move anything. I couldn't even sleep in our bed. I'd lie on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening for the sound of her keys, praying for footsteps that never came. Every morning I woke up thinking maybe today she'd call, maybe today she'd come home. But weeks turned into months, and the only thing that returned was silence. Friends tried to convince me to move on, to accept that she wasn't coming back. But how do you accept an ending with no explanation? How do you bury a love when there's no body to mourn? I replayed every moment, every word we'd said in those final hours, trying to find the one sentence, the one mistake that pushed her away. Guilt became my shadow, following me through every room, whispering that I could have stopped her if only I had listened. As the seasons changed, her absence grew heavier. There were moments I swore I could still hear her humming in the kitchen or smell her perfume when I opened the closet. I told myself it was just memory playing tricks, but deep down, I wasn't sure. Sometimes, late at night, I'd imagine her standing just outside the door, watching me, trying to say something but unable to. I knew it was impossible, but hope is a cruel thing. It survives even where logic dies. I thought about her promise often. "You'll never see me again." The words became a ghost that lived with me, following me into sleep, into dreams, into every morning where she wasn't. And yet, even though I tried to hate her for leaving, I couldn't. Part of me still believed there had to be a reason, something bigger than the both of us, something that would make sense of the silence. 8 years passed before I finally stopped waiting. I had rebuilt some kind of life, though not one that ever felt whole. And then, one quiet morning, as I poured myself a cup of coffee in the same kitchen where she'd once sat, I heard a sound that froze me in place. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the door. The mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor, but I didn't move. My heart raced, every nerve on fire, because somehow, deep in my bones, I knew that voice on the other side of that door. 8 years later, I would hear a knock that made my heart stop, because I knew that voice on the other side. Losing someone is hard, but losing them without a reason, that's torture. The first few days after she left felt unreal, like I was living in a version of my life where time had stopped, but the world refused to wait. Her absence was so loud that even silence had a sound. I kept replaying that morning over and over in my mind, hoping that maybe I'd missed something, a clue, a look, a hint that she wasn't gone for good. But every memory ended the same way. The sound of the door closing, and her voice whispering those words that wouldn't stop echoing through my skull. "You'll never see me again." Days turned into weeks, and the silence between us became unbearable. I called her phone so many times that the sound of the dial tone started to feel like mockery. At first, it would ring and go to voicemail. Then, after a few days, it went straight to, "The number you are trying to reach is unavailable." That line broke me more than I could admit. I texted her dozens of times, apologies, questions, pleas. None of them ever delivered. I went to her workplace, but they said she'd quit without notice. I visited her sister's house, but they wouldn't even open the door. Her mother wouldn't speak to me. Her friends avoided my eyes, and it felt like the entire world had silently agreed to erase her from existence. Nights were the hardest. I'd wake up reaching for the other side of the bed, only to find it cold and untouched. The walls that once echoed with her laughter now felt like they were closing in. I tried keeping the lights on just to make the house feel less empty, but that only made the shadows sharper. Every time I walked past the front door, I half expected to see her shoes there, as if she'd just stepped out for a moment. I even left the porch light on for months, a stupid, desperate ritual, hoping it might guide her back somehow. The guilt came next. Heavy, slow, and suffocating. It wasn't the kind of guilt you could confess away. It was the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you question every version of yourself. I kept asking myself what I did wrong, what I didn't see, what I didn't say, when I stopped being enough for her. I thought about every argument, every time I'd chosen work over dinner, every time I'd let silence replace honesty. I started to believe I'd driven her away. Maybe I was the reason she vanished. That thought kept me awake more nights than I can count. There were moments when the loneliness felt physical, like a weight pressing on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I'd find myself standing in the kitchen, staring at the same coffee mug she'd used, and suddenly the air would thicken until I couldn't move. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection and almost not recognize myself. My eyes looked older, emptier. My voice, when I spoke aloud to no one, sounded foreign. I was becoming a ghost inside my own life, haunting the places she'd touched, refusing to let go because I didn't know how. People told me to move on, to accept that she had made her choice. But how could I move on from something that never ended? Closure is a luxury you don't get when someone disappears without explanation. My friends started to distance themselves. They were tired of my grief, tired of seeing me chase a shadow. I can't blame them. I was tired too. I was tired of waking up to the same silence, tired of waiting for a call that would never come, tired of missing someone who might not even want to be found. And yet, no matter how many times I tried to convince myself she was gone by choice, a small voice inside me whispered otherwise. There were too many unanswered questions, too many loose threads. She'd taken her clothes, yes, but left her passport, her jewelry, her favorite book. She'd told no one where she was going. And that letter she'd left behind, or maybe I should say the lack of one, didn't fit who she was. She wasn't cruel, she wasn't careless. She had to have a reason, something she couldn't tell me, something bigger than us. Months bled into years, and I began to live in fragments. I worked, I slept, I pretended. But no matter what I did, she was always there, not in body, but in memory. Her voice still lingered when I stood in an empty room. Her laughter still echoed faintly when I drove past the park we used to walk through on weekends. Sometimes I thought I saw her in a crowd, a flicker of movement, the way someone tilted their head, the scent of a familiar perfume. Each time I'd rush forward, only to find no one there. My mind played cruel tricks on me, but a small part of me wanted to believe it wasn't just imagination, that maybe she was out there somewhere, watching, just as lost as I was. I tried to bury the hope, but it refused to die. Hope is strange that way. Even when it hurts, it demands to live. I didn't know it then, but that hope was the only thing keeping me from collapsing completely. It was also what kept me looking toward the porch every night before bed, like some part of me expected a sign. A note, a message, anything. And one night, 8 years after she'd vanished, that sign finally came. Until one night, I found something on our porch that changed everything. It was her handwriting. I'd recognize it anywhere. It was a Thursday evening when I first saw it. I remember because it had rained all afternoon, the kind of slow, endless drizzle that makes the world feel smaller, quieter. I'd just gotten home from work, exhausted, drenched from the walk from my car to the porch. When I bent down to pick up the day's mail, I noticed an envelope sitting apart from the others, slightly damp, its edges curled from the moisture. There was no name, no return address, just my street and house number written in neat, familiar cursive. For a moment, my mind didn't want to believe what my eyes already knew. My heart began to hammer against my ribs as I ran my thumb along the flap. It couldn't be. After all these years, it simply couldn't. But the handwriting, it was hers. The way she wrote the number 2, with that tiny upward curve at the bottom, the slant in her lowercase r, it was all there. My hand started to shake before I even opened it. The air around me felt thick, heavy with the ghosts of memories I thought I'd buried. I stood there on the porch for a long minute, staring at that envelope like it was a living thing. Part of me was afraid to open it, afraid that whatever was inside might unravel me all over again. But curiosity and hope are dangerous allies. I tore the flap open carefully and pulled out a single folded sheet of paper. It wasn't long. Just a few lines written in that same delicate, looping hand I had memorized from years of grocery lists, birthday cards, and love notes she used to hide in my jacket pockets. My throat tightened as I began to read. Forgive me. One day, you'll understand. That was it. No greeting, no explanation, no signature. The simplicity of it felt cruel. I must have read those 2 sentences 100 times, each repetition cutting deeper than the last. Forgive me for what? Understand what? The words carried both apology and distance, as if she were speaking to me from another world. The paper was slightly wrinkled, soft, and faintly scented with something that froze me in place. Her perfume. The same vanilla and jasmine blend that used to linger in our bedroom long after she'd gone to work. I pressed the paper closer to my face. and for a moment it was like she was there again, not gone, not erased, but near enough for me to feel her presence. Then I noticed something else. A faint stain on the bottom corner of the page, small, irregular, and faded brown. A tear. Not mine. Hers. My knees went weak. I sank into the chair on the porch, clutching the letter like it might vanish if I let go. My mind raced through every possible explanation. Was she trying to say she regretted leaving? That she still loved me? Or was this her way of closing the door for good? The message was too vague, too brief, and that made it even worse. I wanted to scream. After 8 years of silence, this was all she gave me. 2 cryptic sentences that tore open wounds I'd barely managed to cover. I looked back at the envelope, half expecting another page, something I might have missed. But it was empty. I checked the mailbox again, the porch, even the flower pots nearby, searching for any clue of who had delivered it. Nothing. Whoever had left it had done so quietly, precisely, like they wanted me to find it, but not them. The rain had stopped by then, and the world was dark except for the streetlight casting a yellow glow over the wet pavement. My eyes scanned the street, half expecting to see someone standing there, watching. But the road was empty, and the only sound was the distant hum of crickets. I went inside and laid the letter on the kitchen table under the light. The paper looked delicate, as if it could crumble if I touched it too roughly. I studied the handwriting again, tracing each line with my finger, my chest tightening with every loop of ink. It was definitely hers. I would have bet my life on it. But the question that haunted me wasn't if it was from her. It was how. How could she have written this after all these years of silence? Where had she been? Why now? I considered the possibility that someone else might have sent it. Maybe a cruel prank or an elaborate coincidence. But deep down, I knew better. No one else could have known her handwriting, her scent, or the way she dotted her I just a little too high. Still, something about it didn't feel right. The paper looked new, untouched by time, as if it had been written recently. The ink hadn't faded. It wasn't yellowed or worn. She'd written it not long ago. That realization hit me harder than anything else. She was alive. Somewhere out there, she was still alive. And for reasons I couldn't understand, she was reaching out to me now. The thought electrified me. My first instinct was to run to her family again, to demand answers. But a colder, quieter part of me knew that wouldn't work. They had their secrets. They'd kept them before. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, maybe even one of them, had brought this letter to me. Maybe they were watching, waiting to see what I'd do next. The idea made my skin crawl. I locked the door, pulled the curtains shut, and sat there in the dim light, staring at the letter like it was a message from another lifetime. As the clock ticked toward midnight, I picked up the note again and noticed something I hadn't before. A faint indentation on the back of the paper, as if someone had pressed too hard while writing. It was another line, barely visible, scrawled in smaller letters beneath the main message. I held it against the light, and my heart stuttered as the words came into view. Keep your heart open. I'll need it soon. For the first time in 8 years, I felt something that wasn't grief. It was fear. The last line of the letter read, "Keep your heart open. I'll need it soon." You can't mourn forever, but forgetting feels like betrayal. Grief has a strange way of reshaping time. The first few years after the letter felt like an endless loop of empty mornings and sleepless nights. I woke up each day expecting the world to somehow feel lighter, but it didn't. The ache was still there. Duller, quieter, but constant, like a scar you stop noticing until someone brushes against it. I told myself I couldn't live in the past forever, but moving forward felt like treason. Every time I tried to smile, laugh, or find joy in something new, it felt like I was erasing her a little more. How do you build a life again when the foundation still belongs to someone who's gone? Therapy came after a friend begged me to talk to someone. At first, I hated the idea of spilling my pain to a stranger who could never understand the way her absence had hollowed me out. But week after week, the words began to pour out, slowly, at first, then like a flood. My therapist said something once that stuck with me. You can't carry the ghost and the man at the same time. I didn't understand it then, but she was right. For years, I'd been living with two versions of myself, the man who lost her and the ghost who refused to let her go. Somewhere between those two, I had to find something human again. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into it with the kind of obsession that only the broken can manage. Long hours, endless projects, empty weekends, it all helped fill the silence. My coworkers started calling me reliable, dependable, the guy who never says no. They didn't know that every yes I gave them was a way to avoid going home to an empty house. I decorated my office with framed certificates and kept my personal life tucked neatly out of sight. On the outside, I looked stable. On the inside, I was balancing between healing and denial. Still, time has a strange mercy about it. Seasons passed, the sharp edges of grief began to soften, and I found small pieces of peace in ordinary things. Coffee on a quiet morning, the sound of rain against the window, the smell of fresh cut grass. I made new friends, went on a few polite dates, and even allowed myself to laugh without feeling the sting of guilt immediately after. But no matter how much I tried to move forward, one thing remained untouched: the letter. I kept it locked in the top drawer of my desk, wrapped carefully in an old envelope, sealed in a small wooden box. It wasn't just paper. It was the last tangible proof that she had been real, that she had reached out across time to speak to me. Sometimes, when the nights felt too heavy or the loneliness too sharp, I would open the drawer, unfold the letter, and run my fingers across her handwriting. Forgive me. One day you'll understand. Those words had become both a comfort and a curse. I told myself that one day I would, but 8 years is a long time to live without answers. People say time heals all wounds, but that's not true. Time doesn't heal. It just teaches you how to carry the pain without breaking. It dulls the edges, makes it easier to breathe, but it never erases. There were days when I felt almost normal, when the grief was faint enough to let me believe I'd finally found balance. And then something, a scent, a song, a phrase, would slice through that illusion like glass. That was the price of loving someone who vanished without goodbye. You never stop feeling the weight. You just learn how to hold it without trembling. 8 years had passed since that morning she walked away. 8 years since I'd last heard her voice. By now, I'd stopped waiting for miracles. Life had become quieter, manageable, maybe even good. I told myself that the universe had closed that chapter, that whatever reason she'd had for leaving, it no longer mattered. I had survived. I had learned to live again. Not fully, not fearlessly, but enough. And then one day, on an ordinary morning that looked no different from any other, everything changed. I was sitting in the same kitchen where she'd once told me she was leaving, sipping my coffee, lost in thought. The sky outside was pale and overcast, the kind of day that makes you want to stay home and do nothing. And then it happened. A sound so simple, so small, yet it froze me in place. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the front door. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it. But when the second set came, louder this time, something deep inside me stirred, an instinct, a recognition, something I couldn't explain. My heart started to race. The mug in my hand trembled, and I found myself standing before I even realized I'd moved. The world outside the window seemed to hold its breath. I thought I had moved on, until fate came knocking, literally. Some sounds take you back in time. This one nearly stopped my heart. It was a Saturday morning like any other, the kind of morning where life feels comfortably predictable. I had just finished brewing my coffee, the smell of roasted beans filling the kitchen when I heard it. 3 soft knocks against the front door. At first, I thought it was a neighbor, maybe a delivery, something ordinary. But there was something about the rhythm of those knocks, slow and deliberate, that made the air shift around me. My heart stilled for a moment, and a faint sense of familiarity crawled up my spine. I couldn't explain why, but I knew before I even reached the hallway that whoever stood on the other side of that door wasn't just another visitor. I set the coffee mug down, my hand trembling slightly as I walked toward the door. The sound of my footsteps on the hardwood floor echoed in the stillness of the house. When I reached the door, I hesitated. The memory of the last time someone had left through that same door, her, flashed before my eyes. 8 years of silence, of unanswered questions, of rebuilding my life piece by piece, all suddenly pressed against my chest at once. I told myself it couldn't be her. It was impossible. But my body knew before my mind could catch up. I took a deep breath and turned the handle. The moment the door opened, time fractured. Standing there on the porch was a face I had convinced myself I would never see again. Her, my wife, the woman who had walked out of my life 8 years ago and vanished without a trace. She looked almost like a ghost, thinner, paler, older, but unmistakably her. The world around me seemed to tilt, and the sound of my own heartbeat roared in my ears. For a second, neither of us spoke. She just stood there, frozen, her hand gripping something, or rather, someone, small beside her. That's when I saw the child. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7, stood half-hidden behind her, clutching her mother's hand so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She had wide, uncertain eyes that peered up at me from beneath a curtain of soft brown hair. Those eyes? There was something painfully familiar about them. The color, the shape. It was like staring into a mirror of my own childhood. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to speak, to say her name, but the words just dissolved in my mouth. She looked different, but not unrecognizable. Her hair, once long and dark, was shorter now, streaked with silver near the temples. There were faint lines around her eyes, the kind that come from years of worry rather than laughter. Her clothes were simple, a gray coat that looked a size too big, faded jeans, and worn shoes. She looked like someone who had been running for a long time and had finally run out of road. The wind brushed past her, and for a fleeting second, I caught that scent, faint but unmistakable, the same vanilla and jasmine that had haunted my memory for nearly a decade. I tried to speak, but my voice cracked. My mind was a storm of questions and disbelief. "Is it really?" She nodded, her lips trembling as tears filled her eyes. "Hi," she whispered, her voice fragile, almost unrecognizable. "It's me." For a moment, the world stopped moving. I didn't know whether to pull her into my arms or slam the door to protect myself from the chaos that her presence carried. Every emotion I'd buried, anger, love, confusion, grief, came rushing back like a tidal wave. I looked at the child again. She pressed herself closer to her mother's leg, peeking up at me with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Those eyes, I couldn't look away. The silence between us was unbearable. I wanted to ask where she'd been, why she'd left, why she was here now after all these years. But all that came out was a whisper. "Why?" Her lips parted as if to answer, but no sound came. A single tear rolled down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away. She glanced at the little girl, then back at me, her expression soft but pained. I realized then that whatever story she carried was heavy, too heavy for the doorway. 8 years of silence collapsed in that single moment. All the nights I'd stayed awake wondering if she was dead, all the letters I'd written and never sent, all the prayers and curses whispered into the dark. They all came crashing together in that breathless pause between us. I could feel my pulse pounding in my throat, every instinct screaming that none of this was real. But she was there. Flesh, bone? Tears, standing on my porch like time itself had folded to bring her back. The little girl tugged on her hand and whispered something I couldn't hear. My wife, no, my stranger, crouched down, smoothing the girl's hair before looking back up at me. Her eyes were pleading, full of something I couldn't name. Fear, maybe, or desperation. I finally found my voice, though it came out harsher than I intended. You said I'd never see you again. No, she said quietly. And I meant it. Her gaze dropped to the child again, and she added, But things changed. I didn't have a choice. My hands clenched at my sides, a dozen questions burning in my chest. Whose child is that? For the first time, she looked directly at me, her expression breaking, her lips trembling as she opened her mouth. But before I could say another word, she took a small step forward, her eyes glistening, her voice trembling. Please, she whispered. Don't shut the door. And then she whispered, Please, don't shut the door. The woman I once loved was back, but she wasn't the same person anymore. For a long moment I stood frozen in the doorway, torn between slamming it shut and pulling her inside before the cold wind swallowed her again. My heart was pounding so violently that I could barely hear her shallow breathing. She looked exhausted, fragile even, her face pale beneath the gray sky. The child clung tighter to her leg, as if she, too, sensed the uncertainty hanging between us. Without saying a word, I stepped aside. She hesitated, her eyes flickering with something between fear and relief, then crossed the threshold as though she were stepping back into another lifetime. The little girl followed, holding her hand tightly. The door closed behind us with a soft click that echoed through the quiet house. For 8 years, I'd imagined this moment in 100 different ways. Anger, reunion, shouting, tears. But the silence that followed was nothing like what I'd expected. She stood in the living room, looking around slowly, her eyes darting from the photographs on the wall to the couch, to the clock ticking faintly above the fireplace. Every corner of the room seemed to recognize her, but she didn't belong to it anymore. Her presence was both familiar and foreign, like hearing a song you used to love but can't remember the lyrics to. The air between us was heavy with everything left unsaid. The little girl, curious but shy, stepped closer to the old coffee table and brushed her small fingers along its edge. This is where you live? She asked softly, her voice breaking the silence. I nodded, unsure how to respond. She had her mother's voice, gentle but sharp at the ends. My eyes shifted between them, searching for meaning in their resemblance. Would you like something to drink? I finally asked, just to fill the space between us. She shook her head, a faint smile flickering across her lips, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. You still ask that? She murmured. The familiarity in her tone hit me like a blade. There was a time when I knew her every habit, every expression, every secret. Now I didn't even know who she was anymore. As she looked around, her gaze lingered on the framed photo of us from years ago, the one taken on our wedding day. She didn't touch it, but her fingers twitched slightly, as if resisting the urge. The child noticed the photo, too. Is that you, Mommy? She asked, pointing. My breath caught. She didn't answer immediately. When she finally did, her voice was so faint I almost missed it. Yes, she said. That was a long time ago. The word was landed like a stone in my chest. I couldn't take it anymore. Where have you been? I asked, my voice low but trembling. 8 years and not a single word. You just vanished. Why now? Why after all this time? She turned toward me slowly, her expression unreadable. It's not that simple, she said, her tone cautious, as if she were afraid the wrong words might shatter the fragile peace between us. Then make it simple, I snapped. You said I'd never see you again. You made me believe you were gone for good. Do you have any idea what that did to me? What I went through? My voice rose with each sentence, but she didn't flinch. She just stood there, taking it all in, her eyes shimmering with tears that refused to fall. "I wanted to come back," she said softly, her voice cracking. "So many times I almost did. But I couldn't. Not until now." "Why not?" I demanded, stepping closer. "What stopped you?" Her gaze dropped to the floor. "You wouldn't understand," she whispered. "Try me." The little girl looked up at both of us, sensing the tension in the air. She tugged gently at her mother's hand. "Mommy?" she said, voice small. My wife, or the woman who used to be my wife, knelt beside her and brushed a hand over her hair. "It's okay, sweetheart. Go look at the books over there." The girl nodded, wandering off toward the bookshelf, her small footsteps padding softly against the wooden floor. When she was out of earshot, my wife straightened and finally met my eyes. "You have every right to hate me," she said. "And you probably should. But what I did because I had to." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "Had to? What does that even mean?" Her lips trembled as she tried to form the words. "There were things you didn't know, things I couldn't tell you back then. It wasn't about us, it was about survival." The word hung between us like a riddle. "Survival from what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She shook her head, tears spilling now, her voice breaking apart. "Please don't ask me that, not yet." I wanted to scream. 8 years of silence, and now she was standing in my living room, speaking in half-truths and riddles. I wanted to reach out and shake the truth out of her, but something in her eyes stopped me. That same haunted look she'd had the morning she left. Whatever she'd been through, it wasn't just regret or guilt. It was fear. The child had found an old photo album on the shelf and was flipping through it, her laughter breaking through the heavy air. That sound, innocent and light, twisted something inside me. It didn't belong to this house filled with ghosts. I turned back to my wife. "Is she?" I started to ask, but she interrupted. "Don't," she said quickly, her voice sharp with panic. "Not now, please." The way she said it, the urgency in her tone, made my chest tighten. I stared at her, trying to piece together a puzzle I didn't even know the edges of. She looked down at her hands, trembling, twisting the hem of her coat. For the first time since she arrived, I noticed how cold she looked, as if she hadn't felt warmth in years. She took a deep, shaky breath, as though trying to summon courage she no longer had. "There are things you don't know, things that will hurt you to hear," she said, her voice thin but steady. "But you deserve the truth." I waited, my pulse pounding in my ears. Her eyes lifted to mine, full of sorrow, guilt, and something else, a kind of desperation that scared me more than anger ever could. She opened her mouth to speak again, her voice trembling. "What I'm about to tell you," she said quietly, "will change everything you think you know about the last 8 years." Her next words shattered everything I believed about the past 8 years. Sometimes, love doesn't leave. It hides to protect you. She sat across from me on the couch, her hands clasped tightly together, eyes fixed on the floor as if the story she was about to tell had been buried for so long that dragging it back into the light would hurt. I waited in silence, my heart pounding in my chest, unsure whether I was ready to hear any of it. For 8 years, I'd built walls around my pain, brick by brick, to keep myself from drowning in questions I couldn't answer. And now, with one look, she was about to tear those walls down. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that," she began, her voice trembling. "That night, when I told you I was leaving, I didn't mean to hurt you. I was scared, not of you, but of what was happening around us." I frowned, leaning forward. "What do you mean, what was happening around us?" She took a deep breath, as though the air itself weighed too much to carry. "I was in trouble," she said quietly. "Someone I trusted, someone close to my family. They got involved in something they shouldn't have. I thought I could fix it before it touched us, but it was already too late." Her words hung in the air, heavy and unreal. "What kind of trouble?" I asked, my voice sharp but low. She looked up then, and for the first time, I saw the fear in her eyes. Not the kind that fades with time, but the kind that changes you forever. "Money," she whispered. "Debts, lies, threats. My brother owed people he shouldn't have, and they came looking for him. When they couldn't find him, they came to me. They said if I didn't make the debt right, they'd hurt the people I loved. That meant you." I felt the room tilt slightly as her words sank in. "So, you left to protect me?" She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I thought if I disappeared, they'd stop watching you. I thought they'd forget. But they didn't. They followed me for months. I had to move constantly. New towns, new names, new everything. I couldn't call, couldn't write. It wasn't just about me anymore." She paused then, her breath catching. I was pregnant. The word hit me like a blow to the chest. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. My eyes flickered to the child sitting quietly in the other room, flipping through the photo album, humming softly to herself. "You were pregnant?" I repeated, the words coming out barely above a whisper. She nodded, her hands trembling as she wiped at her eyes. "I found out the week before I left. I wanted to tell you, but then everything started falling apart. When they threatened you, I knew I couldn't risk it. I had to protect the baby. I had to protect both of you." I sat there, numb, my mind spinning in 100 directions. The anger that had been simmering beneath my skin for years began to shift into something I didn't know how to name. She had left without a word, vanished from my life like smoke. But now the truth was sitting right in front of me, and it was heavier than anything I'd imagined. "But why didn't you come back?" I asked finally, my voice breaking. "When it was over? When you were safe? Why didn't you tell me then?" She shook her head. "It was never really over. I didn't know who I could trust anymore. The people who were supposed to help me turned on me. I was terrified every single day. I moved from one place to another, always looking over my shoulder. The only thing that kept me going was her." She glanced toward the other room again, her voice softening. She was the reason I stayed alive. Her confession should have brought peace, but instead it carved new wounds. I wanted to be angry, to accuse her of lying, but the pain etched across her face was too real. She wasn't just hiding from me. She had been hiding from the world. "That night you left," I said slowly. "You said, 'You'll never see me again.' Was that supposed to protect me too?" Her lips quivered. "Yes. I thought if you believed it was final, you'd stop looking for me. I thought if you hated me, you'd be safe. I had to make you let me go." I looked at her, at the woman I had loved more than my own breath, and felt a strange mix of fury and pity. She had made choices I couldn't understand, but the desperation in her eyes told me they hadn't been easy ones. "You should have told me," I said quietly. "I could have helped you." She smiled sadly, a faint, broken smile. "You would have tried. That's exactly why I couldn't tell you. You don't know how to stop fighting for people you love. I couldn't let that destroy you too." The room fell silent again. The clock ticked on the wall, each second stretching out, like an accusation. She sat there, tears glistening on her cheeks, while I tried to piece together the 8 lost years that suddenly felt both unbearable and tragically small. Then something inside me twisted. A thought, unspoken but sharp. I looked toward the child again. "You said you were pregnant when you left," I said slowly, "and that you ran to protect her. But if you left that night—" My voice trailed off. A cold realization crept in. "How do you know she's mine?" Her face went pale. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The silence that followed was deafening. She looked away, her hands tightening in her lap, her shoulders shaking. "Please," she whispered, not meeting my eyes. "Don't ask me that right now." But I had to. The question was a storm tearing through every memory I'd been holding on to. The truth might destroy me, but I needed it. I needed to know everything, the whole story, every secret she'd kept buried. But one truth still didn't fit, and I needed to know who the father was. The truth hurts less than uncertainty, and I needed to know. For a long time, we just sat there in silence after her confession. The air between us was thick, charged with everything unspoken. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the next room, the tick of the clock, the soft sound of the child humming to herself as she turned the pages of a photo album, a small, innocent rhythm against the chaos that was unraveling inside me. My wife, the woman I had spent years grieving, had just dropped a truth that cut through me like glass. She'd been pregnant when she left. She'd been running for her life. But now, every look, every pause, every unfinished sentence pointed toward one unbearable question I couldn't avoid anymore. I finally turned to face her. "Is she mine?" I asked, my voice low, trembling with a mix of fear and anger. "That little girl, is she my daughter?" Her eyes filled instantly, not with guilt, but with something heavier. She swallowed hard and looked away, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her coat. "I want to say yes," she whispered. "I believe she is, but I can't be absolutely sure." Her words hit me like a blow. My chest felt hollow, as if all the air had been pulled out of the room. "What do you mean you can't be sure?" I demanded. My voice was shaking now, sharper than I intended. "You said you left because you were pregnant. You said you were protecting her. Protecting me. What the hell does that mean if you don't even know?" Tears welled in her eyes, and she shook her head slowly, her voice breaking as she spoke. "You don't understand what it was like back then. I was alone, terrified, desperate. The people who were after me, they didn't stop when I ran. There were nights when I thought I wouldn't make it out alive. I had to stay with strangers, rely on people I didn't know, and not all of them were kind." Her words made my stomach twist. The implication hung heavy in the air, unspoken but clear. I felt dizzy, sick even. My mind tried to reject it, to push the thought away, but it wouldn't leave. "Are you saying someone—" She nodded slightly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't know. I was drugged one night. I woke up the next morning disoriented, confused, and I left that place the same day. Weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. The timing matched, but I couldn't be certain. I wanted to believe she was yours. I needed to believe that. But part of me has always been afraid." I leaned back, unable to process it all. The walls seemed to close in, the room shrinking with every word she spoke. I glanced toward the little girl again, her laughter faint from the other room as she traced her finger over a photo of me and her mother from years ago. My chest ached. I wanted to believe what I saw in her eyes, the same deep brown as mine, the same subtle dimple that appeared when she smiled. Everything about her felt familiar, almost painfully so. But now doubt had crept in, and once it enters, it doesn't leave easily. "I need to know," I said finally, my voice hoarse. "I can't live with maybes anymore. We're doing a test, today." She nodded slowly, wiping at her tears. "I understand. I've been waiting for this day for years. I just didn't know how to face it. The next morning, I made the arrangements. I told her we'd go together. The drive to the clinic was quiet, the kind of silence that carries every emotion words can't express. The little girl sat in the back seat, humming softly, holding a small stuffed bear against her chest. Every time I looked at her through the rearview mirror, my throat tightened. I wanted to speak, to ask her something, to make her laugh, anything to distract from the storm raging inside me. But I couldn't. My mind was stuck in a loop, replaying the same question over and over. What if she isn't mine? At the clinic, the process was painfully simple. A quick swab, a signature, a label. It felt wrong that something so small, so quick, could determine the truth that had haunted me for nearly a decade. The nurse was kind, professional, but even her polite smile couldn't soften the tension that radiated between us. When it was over, my wife, my stranger, thanked her quietly, then looked at me as we walked out. "It'll take a few days," she said. "We'll know soon." "Soon," I repeated. the word feeling both like a promise and a threat. Those days that followed were some of the longest of my life. I tried to distract myself with work, with chores, with anything that would keep my mind from circling back to that envelope of truth waiting to be printed. But nothing worked. Every sound in the house, every laugh from the child, every look from her mother tore at the same wound. I couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, trying to prepare myself for both possibilities, that she was mine or that she wasn't. I didn't know which would hurt more. Memories began to flood my mind, uninvited. The day she told me she loved me for the first time. The night we danced barefoot in the kitchen. The morning she left. Each memory tangled itself with the image of the little girl's face, her smile, her curiosity, her laugh, and I couldn't separate them anymore. Whether she was my blood or not, she was somehow part of me now. And that terrified me even more. I started noticing small things about her that tugged at my heart. The way she furrowed her brow when she concentrated, the same way I did. The way she tilted her head when she asked a question, the same as her mother used to. Every detail blurred the line between doubt and hope. And still, the envelope hadn't come. Finally, on the 5th day, when I was sitting by the kitchen window watching the rain streak down the glass, I heard the mail slot open. A small white envelope slid onto the floor with a soft whisper. For a moment, I couldn't move. My body refused to obey my mind. It was as if touching it would make everything too real. I picked it up slowly, my hands trembling so hard I almost dropped it. My name was printed neatly on the front, and inside, a single sheet of paper waited. The air seemed to thicken around me as I broke the seal and pulled the results free. The paper shook between my fingers, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear my own breath. When the results arrived, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I didn't need a test to tell me. I saw myself in her eyes. The letter trembled in my hands as I unfolded it. My vision blurred, and for a moment I couldn't bring myself to read the words. It was strange. I had spent days preparing for this, yet in the silence of that kitchen, I wasn't ready for the truth that waited on that page. The rain outside tapped against the windows like a faint heartbeat, and my pulse echoed its rhythm. I took a deep breath and forced myself to look down. Probability of paternity? 99.9%. I read it once, then again, then again. The words didn't sink in at first. They floated, weightless, unreal, like something too big to grasp. I sank into the chair, the paper slipping from my trembling fingers to the table. My eyes burned, and before I knew it, tears were falling freely, landing in small, dark spots on the report. She was mine. The little girl, the one who had walked into my house holding her mother's hand, looking up at me with cautious eyes. She was mine. For 8 years, I had carried guilt like a shadow, believing I had driven her mother away, that I had somehow failed her. Now, sitting there, I felt a different kind of guilt, one that came from realizing I'd doubted her. I thought back to that first moment at the door, the way the child had looked at me, curious but calm, as if she already knew me in some unspoken way. Maybe she did. Maybe she had always known. I heard footsteps behind me, and when I turned, my wife stood in the doorway, her eyes red and tired. She had been watching me from the hall, waiting for my reaction. For a moment, neither of us said a word. I simply stood up and walked toward her, holding the paper in my shaking hand. She didn't ask what it said. She already knew. When I reached her, I held out the letter, and she looked down at it for a long time before whispering, "I told you. I always believed she was yours." Something inside me broke open then. All the anger, all the pain, all the confusion of the past 8 years poured out in a rush. I pulled her into my arms and held her so tightly I could feel her heartbeat against my chest. She didn't resist. She just let go. Of everything. Her body trembled as she began to cry, deep, shuddering sobs that came from a place far beyond words. I buried my face in her hair, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt something close to peace. When we finally pulled apart, I wiped the tears from her cheeks and looked at her properly, really looked at her. The woman standing before me was not the one I had married. The years had taken their toll. She was thinner, her skin pale, her eyes shadowed by fatigue. There was something fragile about her, something that scared me in a way I didn't yet understand. "We can start over," I said, my voice soft but certain. "You, me, her. We can fix this. We can make it work." She smiled faintly, but there was sadness behind it. "You always think you can fix things," she said, her voice a whisper. "Some things aren't meant to be fixed. Some things just have to be accepted." I frowned, not sure what she meant. "What are you talking about?" She hesitated, her eyes dropping to the floor. "There's something I didn't tell you," she said. "Something I didn't want to tell you until I knew you were ready to hear it." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "I'm sick." The word hit me like a slap. "Sick? What do you mean, sick?" Her eyes filled with tears again. "I've been fighting it for years. At first, I thought I could beat it. Treatments, medicine, moving from doctor to doctor. But it's getting worse. That's why I came back." She looked up at me then, her eyes shining with equal parts strength and sorrow. "I couldn't keep running. I wanted her to know you, to know who you are before—" Her voice trailed off. I felt my knees weaken. "Before what?" I asked, though I already knew. "Before I can't anymore," she whispered. I turned away, gripping the back of a chair just to steady myself. My throat tightened, my vision blurred again. I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, that she would get better, that I wouldn't let her go through it alone. But she looked at me with the kind of quiet certainty that only comes from someone who's already made peace with the truth. "How long?" I asked finally. She hesitated. "Months, maybe. A year if I'm lucky." The room spun around me. I stared at her, unable to comprehend how fate could be this cruel. To take her away once, then bring her back just to threaten to take her again. She walked toward me slowly, reached up and placed her hand against my cheek. "I didn't come back to make you hurt again," she said softly. "I came back because she deserves you. Because you're her father. And she needs to know what love really looks like." I covered her hand with mine and closed my eyes. There were no words left, only the sound of our breathing and the quiet rhythm of the child's laughter from the next room. That night, after the little girl had fallen asleep in the guest room, we sat together on the couch in silence. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and I held her hand, afraid that if I let go, she might disappear again. The house, once so empty, now felt alive, but fragile, like the fragile heartbeat of something that had come back only to remind me of what I'd lost. We stayed like that until the early hours, saying little, just existing in the same space again. When she finally went to bed, I sat alone, staring at the folded test results on the table. I should have felt closure. I should have felt peace. But something deep inside me whispered that this moment, this small, fragile happiness, wouldn't last. When I woke up the next morning, the house was silent. Too silent. The bed where she had slept was neatly made. The child's coat and shoes were gone. The small wooden box with the letter she'd left me years ago was missing from the drawer. They were gone. Again. The next morning, she and the child were gone again. Losing her once broke me. Losing her twice nearly destroyed me. The morning I woke up to an empty house, I knew something was wrong before I even opened my eyes. There was a stillness, the kind that presses on your chest and makes it hard to breathe. The bed beside me was cold, untouched, and the faint hum of life that had filled the house the night before was gone. Her shoes were missing from the doorway. The child's jacket was gone from the coat rack, and the soft, comforting clutter they had brought back into my world had vanished. It was as if they had never been there at all. For a moment, I thought maybe they'd gone out early, Maybe for a walk, maybe for breakfast. But something in my gut told me otherwise. Something deeper. Something I couldn't ignore. I tore through the house calling their names, hoping for an answer that never came. The rooms echoed with my voice, but only silence answered back. Her phone, the one I'd found on the kitchen counter the night before, was still there, its screen dark, lifeless. My hands shook as I scrolled through her messages. There was nothing. No clues, no notes, no goodbye. It was the same emptiness I had lived through 8 years earlier. Only this time, it hurt worse. Because this time, she had taken a part of me with her, a living, breathing piece of my soul. I called hospitals first, then police stations. I drove through every street in town, checking the diner she once loved, the old bookstore she used to visit, even the small motel near the highway where she'd stayed the night before she first disappeared. Every place felt both familiar and foreign, like time itself had folded in on me. People recognized me. Some even remembered her, but no one had seen her this time. With every hour that passed, panic grew heavier, clawing at my chest until breathing felt like punishment. I reached out to her family again, even though they'd shut me out before. Her sister's voice was cold when she picked up the phone. "She's gone again, isn't she?" she said flatly, as if it were something she'd expected. I asked if she knew where, but she refused to answer. "You don't understand," she said, her tone tight. "When she disappears, it's never because she wants to. There are things you shouldn't go chasing. Let her go this time." But I couldn't. I wouldn't. Not again. Days blurred into nights. I barely slept, barely ate. I retraced every place she'd ever been. The clinic where we'd done the test, the park she used to take morning walks in, even the little cafe near the river where we first met. Each step felt heavier than the last, fueled by equal parts desperation and guilt. The guilt was the worst. The haunting thought that maybe she'd left because I'd pushed too hard, because I'd tried to fix things she didn't want fixed. Maybe she hadn't been ready to stay. Maybe I'd scared her off again. Then, one evening, as I was going through the drawers in her old suitcase, the one she'd brought when she came back, I found something I hadn't seen before. A small folded note tucked between 2 old photographs. My heart pounded as I opened it. The handwriting was hers, rushed and uneven, like it had been written in haste. "If you're reading this, I'm sorry. I didn't want to leave like this again. But there's something I have to face before it's too late. You'll understand when you find me. L." I stared at the note for a long time, my mind spinning. There was no address, no explanation, just that cryptic message. The paper smelled faintly of river water and wildflowers, a scent that tugged at something deep in my memory. The river. The same one where we used to walk when we were young. The same place where she had once told me she felt free. Suddenly, it made sense. She was going back there. I grabbed my keys and drove through the night, the headlights cutting through the fog as the road twisted and turned through the outskirts of town. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Every second that passed felt like another chance, slipping away. The rain had started again, light at first, then harder, blurring the world outside the windshield. But I didn't slow down. I couldn't. When I finally reached the riverbank, dawn was breaking over the horizon. The pale light shimmered across the water, and the mist hung low, curling through the trees like smoke. For a moment, everything was still. Then I saw her. She was sitting on a bench near the edge of the water, her shoulders hunched, her hair damp from the rain. The child wasn't with her. My heart stopped. I ran to her, my shoes slipping on the wet grass, my voice breaking as I called her name. She turned slowly, and for the first time, I saw how fragile she'd become. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow but soft. She tried to stand when she saw me, but her legs gave out, and I caught her just before she fell. Her body felt weightless in my arms, not the woman I'd known, but a shadow of her. Where is she? I asked, my voice trembling as I held her close. Where's our daughter? Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She tried to speak, tried to tell me something, but the effort was too much. She leaned against me, her breath shallow, her skin cold. I brushed the wet hair from her face and whispered, I'm here. You don't have to run anymore. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked up at me with the faintest smile. I knew you'd find me, she whispered. You always do. I wanted to tell her everything, how I'd searched every street, every hospital, every shadow of our past, how I'd almost lost my mind, not knowing if she was safe. But all I could do was hold her tighter, afraid that if I let go, she might vanish again. Her hand trembled as she reached for mine. She's safe, she murmured weakly. I had to make sure first, before I... Her voice faltered. Before what? I asked, panic creeping into my voice, but she didn't answer. She tried to stand, but her body swayed. I caught her again, my arms around her frail frame. She looked up at me one last time, her eyes full of something that broke me completely. Peace. And this time, she was too weak to stand. Her truth came out in fragments, like broken glass cutting through silence. The world around us blurred into nothing but the steady rush of the river and the uneven rhythm of her breathing. She leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder, her fingers trembling as they clutched my sleeve. Her skin was cold, too cold, and every instinct in me screamed to get her help, to call someone, anyone. But when I reached for my phone, she stopped me. Her voice was faint but firm. No hospitals, she whispered. Please, not this time. I didn't understand. I couldn't. My heart was breaking all over again, and she was looking at me with that same calm, distant expression that had haunted me for 8 years. You're sick, I said, my voice cracking. You told me it was getting worse, but I didn't think... She interrupted softly, shaking her head. It's been years. The doctors did everything they could, but the cancer spread faster than they expected. I was running from it at first, pretending I could escape it, but you can't run from your own body. That's why I left again. I didn't want you or her to see me fade away. Her words hit me like a wave, stealing the air from my lungs. You should have told me, I whispered. You shouldn't have gone through this alone. Her lips curved into a fragile smile. You were always the one who tried to fix everything, remember? I didn't want you to spend your life trying to save me. I wanted you to live. I shook my head, tears burning behind my eyes. I would have done anything for you. I still would. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength, then spoke again. You remember what I told you the night I left? That you'd never see me again? I nodded, swallowing hard. I never forgot. I said that because I thought I was saving you, she said, her voice trembling. But every day after, I realized that leaving you broke something inside me that never healed. I thought about you every morning, every night. Every time she laughed, I saw your face in her smile. It was the one piece of happiness I could hold on to when everything else was falling apart. The mention of our daughter made my chest tighten. Where is she? I asked. You said she's safe. A faint smile touched her lips. She's with a friend, someone I trust. I didn't want her to see me like this. She's just a child. She deserves to remember me smiling, not this. Her voice cracked, and a tear slid down her cheek. I brushed it away with my thumb, and she leaned into my touch like it was the only warmth left in her world. You shouldn't have faced this alone, I said again, unable to stop myself. You didn't have to. She shook her head weakly. You don't understand. I wasn't just running from the sickness. There were still people who wanted something from me. The same people who came after my brother. They never stopped looking. Even when I was sick, even when I could barely stand, I had to keep her safe. That's why I stayed away. That's why I never called. Her words sliced through me, each one another piece of the puzzle I'd spent years trying to solve. All this time, I'd thought she'd chosen to leave, that she'd given up on us. But now I saw it clearly. She had been fighting battles I couldn't even imagine. She had been saving us in ways I'd never understood. I held her tighter, feeling her heartbeat flutter weakly against my chest. "You don't have to run anymore," I whispered. "It's over. You're home now." She opened her eyes, her gaze meeting mine. "Home," she repeated softly, as if testing the word. I missed that word. For a moment she smiled, a real smile, small but full of something pure and familiar. "You were my home," she added, "even when I was gone." My throat closed up. I wanted to tell her how much I still loved her, how much she'd meant to me, even after everything. But the words felt too small for the weight of what I felt. So I just held her, hoping that somehow she could feel everything I couldn't say. The sun had begun to rise, turning the river into a ribbon of gold. She stared at it for a long time, her breathing slowing, her voice softer than the wind. "Promise me something," she said. "Anything," I whispered. She turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting mine with a clarity that pierced through the fog of pain. "Promise me you'll take care of her," she said. "Promise me she'll never have to live the kind of life I did. That she'll know love, real love, and that she'll never doubt it the way I did." I felt my chest tighten as I nodded. "I promise," I said, my voice breaking. "I'll protect her. I'll make sure she knows who you were, how strong you were, how much you loved her." Her eyes glistened with tears that didn't fall. "Thank you," she whispered. "That's all I needed to hear." Her breathing grew shallower, and I felt her body grow heavier in my arms. Panic surged through me, and I called her name, my voice cracking. But she didn't respond. She just looked at me one last time. That same look she'd given me the day we first met, full of quiet wonder and something unspoken. Her fingers brushed against mine, barely there. And then she exhaled, a long, trembling breath that seemed to carry every burden she'd ever held. She reached for my hand and whispered, "Promise me you'll take care of her." Some goodbyes are permanent, others echo forever. She took her last breath in my arms just as the sun crested the horizon. The light spilled across the river, soft and golden, wrapping her in warmth she'd spent years chasing but never finding. For a long moment, I just sat there, frozen in time, holding her as if letting go would make the world collapse. The woman who had once been my everything, my love, my heartbreak, my ghost, was gone for the second and final time. But this time, the silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt sacred, like the closing of a circle that had taken years to complete. I stayed with her until the wind began to pick up and the sun climbed higher. Her hand had grown cold in mine, but I couldn't bring myself to release it. It felt wrong, like abandoning her all over again. The river whispered softly beside us, the same way it had the day we first met, as if the world itself was remembering her too. I thought about that first day, how she had laughed when I tripped on a rock and nearly fell in, how she had called me stubborn, how I had promised I'd always catch her if she fell. I had failed that promise once, but somehow, sitting there beside her still body, I felt like I had finally kept it. I'd found her. I'd caught her. And now she was free. When I finally carried her back to the car, I felt lighter and heavier all at once. Every step hurt, but not the way it used to. This pain was quieter, deeper, the kind that settles in the bones instead of the heart. It wasn't the sharp grief of loss, but the ache of acceptance. She had run for so long, fought for so long, loved in silence for so long, and now the running was over. She was at peace. And somehow, knowing that brought me peace too. I arranged everything myself. I couldn't bear the thought of strangers handling the last part of her journey. I chose a quiet spot under a tree, near the same riverbank where she'd breathed her last. It felt right. The water, the wind, the whisper of leaves above us. I scattered her ashes there, letting the current take her where it wanted. The river carried her away gently, the light dancing on its surface. "You can rest now," I whispered. "You don't have to hide anymore." For a while, I stood there, watching the ripples fade into calm, and I realized something I hadn't understood before. Love doesn't end when a person does. It lingers, in the air, in the places they touched, in the hearts they changed. I used to think love was about holding on, but now I knew it was about letting go without forgetting. That was her final gift to me. The understanding that loss and love are two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without carrying the other. A week later, her friend brought the child to me. I remember opening the door and seeing her standing there, clutching her stuffed bear, her eyes wide and uncertain. She didn't speak at first. She just looked past me into the house, maybe expecting to see her mother appear behind me. I knelt down and opened my arms, unsure if she'd come to me, unsure if I even deserved her trust. But she did. Without hesitation, she stepped forward and wrapped her small arms around my neck. The warmth of that tiny hug broke something inside me, something I hadn't realized was still holding on to despair. In that moment, I understood what my wife had meant when she'd said, "Promise me you'll take care of her." This child, our child, was the living proof that love could survive even the darkest years. She was the second chance I never thought I'd get. Every time I looked at her, I saw her mother, not just in her eyes, but in her stubbornness, her quiet strength, the way she would hum when she was lost in thought. And sometimes, when she smiled, it was like seeing a flicker of light that refused to die. The days that followed were hard. Grief doesn't leave just because you've accepted it. There were mornings when I still reached for a voice that wasn't there. Nights when I caught myself glancing toward the door, half expecting to see her standing there again. But I wasn't the same man I had been 8 years ago, or even the man who had found her by the river. I had learned that love doesn't demand understanding. It only asks for patience. Raising our daughter became both my redemption and my reminder. She asked about her mother often, where she'd gone, why she wasn't coming back. I told her stories about the woman her mother had been before the sickness, before the fear. I told her about the laughter, the way she used to dance barefoot in the kitchen, the way she made even the smallest moments feel extraordinary. I told her about courage, and how sometimes love means walking away to protect the ones you love most. And every time I spoke, I felt like I was keeping her alive a little longer, like her voice still echoed through mine. Years passed, but her memory never faded. There were days when the pain still returned, sharp and unexpected, but it no longer consumed me. Instead, it reminded me that I had lived through something worth remembering. The child grew into a reflection of everything we had lost and everything we had gained, strong, kind, and full of life. Watching her grow gave me purpose, a reason to keep moving forward, a reason to believe that maybe some goodbyes aren't endings after all. Sometimes, when we visit the river, she asks me why I always stare at the water so long. I tell her the truth, that it's where I said goodbye to someone I loved, and where I finally learned what love really means. She always slips her hand into mine then, and I know she understands more than I give her credit for. Life has a way of circling back, of giving you moments that feel eerily familiar. The river still flows, the wind still hums through the trees, and every now and then I swear I can smell her perfume, faint, sweet, carried on the breeze. And in those moments, I don't feel alone. I feel her, not as a ghost, but as a presence woven into the life she left behind. When she said, "You'll never see me again," I didn't know she was both right and wrong. If this story touched your heart, don't leave just yet. There are more stories like this. Stories about love, loss, and the people who never really leave us. Subscribe, stay with me, and let's keep walking through these untold lives together.